I finally got my Steam Deck. So while I know I'm not the first person to talk about it on YouTube, I couldn't wait all this time for it and then not make a video about it. So consider this kind of a cross between a first impressions and maybe even kind of a full review. Was it worth this almost year-long wait? Well, let's take a look and find out. If you don't know what the Steam Deck is, well, I guess I should give a basic explanation. Steam Deck is simply a handheld PC gaming device made by Valve, owners of the Steam online store. It's not the first handheld made to play PC games, but it is the first that's tied directly to Steam, and arguably the first from a major manufacturer, depending on how you define that. But it's kind of like how we had gaming handhelds in general before the Game Boy, but it's the Game Boy we all remember. So this is a big deal. If you're wondering, I placed my order in July of 2021 and finally received it almost exactly 1 year later. This is the 256GB version, so the middle variant. I picked up a 256GB memory card for $35 to double that storage, because you really do need 512 gigs to be comfortable given the size of PC games these days. There is still a bit of a waiting list, but my understanding is that Valve is now producing these a little faster, so I think it's down to maybe a month or two. But yeah, there is some demand. So, first impressions. Love this little padlock hole, so you can lock this thing down. Thieves just can't get through this canvas case. But, yep, this thing is a honker. I'm pretty old school when it comes to handhelds. I did own an original Game Boy in the 80s, here it is, and I've had most of the major handhelds since then. The PSP here is about what I've always thought is the perfect size and shape for a handheld. It'll actually fit just fine into a jacket pocket. The original 3DS is a similar size when closed. If you want to compare the Steam Deck to something more contemporary, here's the original Switch, which I always thought was really too big for a handheld, but I could forgive that because it's really a hybrid device. The Steam Deck still makes the Switch look and feel like a child's toy. Probably the handheld the Steam Deck is closest to in size would be the original Atari Lynx, which was a monster.
Hey, Mr. Block, can I go to the bathroom?
2 minutes.
Oh, yes! Good man. Oh, yes, yes!
I don't have one of those, but I do have a Lynx 2, which is still a pretty mammoth device. The Steam Deck is still a bit bigger overall. Here's the thing though, I've already gotten used to it. It's weird, but it almost just feels right for the Steam Deck to be this size. For one thing, it is basically a full-fledged gaming PC in your hands, and you never really forget that, whether it's because you're playing some kind of really complex game, or emulating a recent console at full speed, more on that in a minute, or doing stuff on the actual Linux desktop. You can install full Windows on this thing if you want, although I don't think it's really worth bothering, but you could. So having all this in a device this size doesn't really feel wrong. The build quality is also just really nice. Everything on the Steam Deck feels premium, from the snappy buttons and D-pad to the silky smooth analog sticks to the dual trackpads, though they are covered in that matte finish that always seems to wear off on laptop trackpads. There's also what seems like a really advanced rumble and pseudo force feedback system. I don't know how many motors are in there, but it's definitely a few. For example, when Steam is running, each of the trackpads has a simulated click when you press them that's totally done in software, but it feels completely mechanical. When Steam is not running, that click is gone. It's wild stuff, man. The deck overall just feels solid, with no creaks or rattles, something that definitely cannot be said for the original Switch. The Switch Lite is a little more comparable in how solid it feels, but it still has controls that just feel janky when put up against the Steam Deck. Now, the Steam Deck does have a fan. When it started shipping, early versions of the OS had it running all the time. The current Steam OS does not do this, but it does run at high speeds during some games. I only really notice it in the heaviest games, but it does get noticeably whiny occasionally. It's really not too bad though. I think it actually took me a few days before I realized the fan was even on. I'm about to show you some of the interface and gameplay, some of which was recorded on a camera and some through video capture. Just a couple caveats about both. First, I realized that I initially didn't even mention the screen at all. I inserted this part later, and that's because it's fine. Every handheld device these days has a screen that's fine. It's plenty bright, sharp, and colorful, nothing to complain about. If it looks washed out in some of the footage, it's just the angle and the reflection of my white ceiling. The one thing the top model of this device has that might be worth it is a glass screen with a supposedly better anti-reflective coating. Now about the video capture. I think Metal Jesus may have talked about this too in one of his videos, and he might have the same setup as me. I'm capturing here using a now pretty old Elgato Game Capture HD, which I keep around because it captures both HDMI and analog sources, which their newer devices do not. But it is an older device now, and it only captures at 30 FPS max. You'll see the DeX frame rate counter in the upper left showing 60 or even higher some of the time, but the Elgato only captures 30, so that's what you're seeing. Also keep in mind that the Steam Deck's internal resolution is 1280 by 800, but it always tries to match its output to the external display devices. For all of these reasons, games often just look a little different when captured from the Steam Deck than they do on the device itself. And if you're a nutcase that watches YouTube on a 120-inch projector, just keep in mind it's a lot harder to see any graphical imperfections on a 7-inch screen, especially in the emulators I'm about to show. The main interface is a pretty logical adaptation of Steam itself, although being so used to either browsing my library or the store on my PC, I don't really see the point of the home page that seems to try to combine elements of both. I guess that's the trend in console interfaces these days, but I just find it inefficient. The library and store pages work just fine though. It is a little strange how stuttery browsing around can be though, given how powerful this thing is. But that's true even on the Xbox Series X. I don't know what it is with these UIs even on modern equipment. Obviously the main point of this device is to allow you to play your Steam library and make purchases in the Steam store. The PC has always been the one platform where I'm somewhat okay with giving up physical media, and it being an open platform with the possibility of playing on multiple devices like this is one reason why. Also, Steam's been around for quite a while now, and I honestly just trust Valve more not to shut off all my online purchases than I do a company like Nintendo or Sony. Maybe that trust will eventually prove to be misplaced, but it is the decision I've made. I've got a library of about 85 games that I've built up over the time I've been on Steam, and you see they're all listed here, available for installation. There's a separate category called Great on Deck, which means those games have been tested, tweaked if necessary, and they're known to run fine. But a lot of other less popular games run fine too. Valve just doesn't have enough data on them yet, so you can try to install anything. I have not yet run across anything with really major problems. The biggest thing I had to deal with was one game that ran only in the upper left corner of the screen until I figured out to just change its resolution. If you look at my library, you see it's heavy with a lot of clickfest type strategy games and sims, as well as a few action games and a couple of retro ports sprinkled in. Honestly, most of these don't make for great handheld games. That's just me and what I normally choose to buy on PC versus console or other handheld platforms. But that will probably change now that I have a Steam Deck. Here's Ikaruga. This is the PC version. I think I picked it up on one of the Steam sales for like $4. It's an amazing shooter, one of Treasure's best, and it's the kind of game that's great on a handheld. Here's Doom 2016. This is mostly on ultra settings. For some reason, maybe because I just never changed this on my desktop, it was set to use OpenGL the first time I ran the game on Steam Deck, and I was surprised at how bad the performance was. But I switched it to use Vulkan, and look at it now. I'm getting between 60 and 100 FPS. Battery life on the Steam Deck isn't great, and normally I'd limit the frame rate myself to 30 FPS, but I'm just showing you what this thing can do right now. Limiting the frame rate is the best way to increase battery life. In some cases, you'll double it that way. Here's an example of one of my ClickFest sim games, Project Hospital. If any of you remember Theme Hospital from the 90s, this game is not that, but it's way more fun in my opinion. It's like a serious hospital sim. There actually is a spiritual successor to Theme Hospital called 2 Point Hospital, and I have that too, but it's Project Hospital that I always go back to. Anyway, while it's a fantastic game on the desktop, any game that just involves a ton of scrolling and clicking is not going to be great on the Steam Deck. So keep that in mind if your current library is like mine. Even some action games can just feel a little too involved for a handheld experience. For example, here I'm trying to load Red Dead Redemption 2, which I had really looked forward to playing on a handheld. But look how long it's taking. This is a huge game, and it was made to sit down and play at home, where load times like this are a little more acceptable. I'm probably not going to be sitting on a train or in line at the DMV or something and fire up my Steam Deck to play RDR2 for a few minutes. It's not even going to be done loading by the time I need to put it away. Yes, RDR2 loading times are longer than the lines at the DMV. By the way, there has been kind of a thing lately about Valve switching to slower SSDs in some of their newer decks. I checked, and this one actually has the faster SSD in it. So it's not all of them that are getting the slower SSD, and my guess is that people who pre-ordered a long time ago are still getting the faster SSDs, whereas if you order now, who knows, you might get the slower SSD. I don't know if it would even affect the loading time of a game like RDR2, but just putting that out there. This is with the faster SSD. Once I'm in the game, it plays just fine. You see, according to the frame rate counter, that it's basically holding around 60 FPS or a little less. And I haven't done anything to tweak the graphics. They're mostly on the highest settings. But this is a game I feel like you really need to sit down and sink your teeth into, spending at least a couple of hours with it each session. It can sometimes take that long just to complete one mission. So for me, even though I was really excited to try it out, other than going on random rampages, I haven't been playing it that much and will probably save it for my desktop. It also uses up the majority of my built-in storage, so it's not really worth having installed. But let's look at one of the best things about the Steam Deck, emulation. I made a video a few years ago where I talked about how the Sony PSP was the best handheld emulation machine, and that is clearly not the case anymore. It may still be the best pocket emulation machine, but the Steam Deck is just on a whole other level. Since it is just a PC, you can install any of the emulators on it that are available, at least for Linux, and there are a lot of them. Many of them have now been prepackaged into Steam Deck specific collections that you can install all at the same time. No hacking, jailbreaking, or other nonsense is required. Just download and install, like on any PC. I've barely scratched the surface yet of what you can do with emulation on this machine, but you see here I have some arcade games, some Dreamcast games, as well as GameCube and one Xbox title. The Steam Deck is powerful enough to run all of these at full speed, and while I'm not about to get my channel shut down by Nintendo for showing you how to do it, you can even emulate the Switch on this device. Just like on your home PC, none of these emulators are 100% perfect, but in most cases they are really, really good on Steam Deck. Dreamcast emulation, for example, is basically indistinguishable from playing the same games on the Dreamcast itself. Some of us used to dream about a handheld Dreamcast, no pun intended. Well, here it is, and it's fantastic. By the way, this is the original Dreamcast version of Res, which I've always felt is somehow a different experience than it is on other platforms. I have the PS2 port and the PS4's Res Infinite as well, and I've always thought the Dreamcast version is just a lot harder. That makes it a little more tense throughout, a little more of an actual game, whereas the later releases are all more of just a relaxing trip. Still good, but sometimes I really want to feel like I'm playing something. Some emulators take a little work to get set up right, and the fact that you don't see more systems represented here is mostly just because I haven't put the work in yet. They're all there under the surface. In fact, I do have the entire Atari 5200 ROM set on my memory card, so I'm not even sure why that's not showing up. Some systems also require BIOS files, hard drive images, and other things, and everything has to be in just the right place and in just the right format. So I'll get more stuff installed here over time. But it's hard to force myself to get another emulator working when right now I can just drop another couple of Dreamcast games on here and have fun with that for a while. Also, like a PC, the system is basically open in terms of hardware. Valve doesn't really restrict what you can do. If the system breaks outside of warranty, open it up and replace whatever you need to from any of the sources carrying replacement parts, like iFixit. I'm sure it's possible to actually upgrade stuff too, although I don't know what's really available to upgrade yet. So, is this a handheld you're going to just jam in a pocket for your daily commute? Probably not. I'm mostly using mine around the house, on the couch, in bed, even at my desk when I just want a quick break. It's big, hefty, can be a little loud, and has battery life that definitely could be better. It's not a perfect machine. I think the real question is, am I better off with it than without it? That's the measure of success of really any product, isn't it? And the answer is, I feel like a happier person having this in my possession than I did before I got it. So on that basis, yes, I do think it's worth going out trying to buy one of these things. It's not cheap, but on the other hand, for what you're getting, which is basically a full PC in handheld form that's powerful enough to play some of the most demanding PC games as well as a lot of other stuff, it's really a pretty good value, I think, especially if you don't need to go for or don't feel the need to go for the top end model. I feel like the middle one is perfectly fine. The lowest model in the range, which only comes with 64 gigs, and it's a slower, it's basically NAND flash from what I recall. That one I might avoid, but the middle, the 256 gig with the SSD, I think that's a pretty good value for what you get. And, if somebody took this from me or I dropped it and broke it, would I feel sad? Would I want to get another one? Yes, I would. So, I don't personally think it's worth waiting for the second iteration to try to fix whatever little problems there are. It's not a perfect machine, but, you can wait for a better version of anything. I'm sure version 2 is still going to have some of its own little issues. The Switch has its own little issues. Every device has its own little issues. So if you can deal with the size and the weight, and you don't think of it as something that's really pocketable and something you're going to walk around, and just play games in short bursts anywhere. If you think of it as kind of an around-the-house device, maybe take it with you on a trip or something like that, use in a hotel room. Like that's I think where it excels, and it's a really great device for that kind of use. So that's about it for the moment. As always, I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.